It's a proof sheet that we use. It's printed out on the one printer that we have for the entire newspaper. We print out the proof sheets, and you want to get a copy of that. And then we go over the proof sheet and make some edits on the proof sheet and make the final changes and say, yep, that's good, and then send it off to the printers.
Very cool. So what have you got over there?
What I have here is the UB Post from May 6, 1996, which was Volume 1, Number 1, the very first ever edition of the UB Post that has now been printed for 14 years. It's the longest running English publication in Mongolia.
Can you give us some tips on how to become a good journalist?
Well, sure. I mean, it all starts with an idea. If you have an idea for a story, I mean, in news, in the news desk, they're actually chasing stories. So as stories unfold, then there's the idea for the story right there. If you're going to write a story about, like, say, a 2-year-old boy is forced to live in jail, there's your topic for the story. And then you do some brainstorming, and then you do an outline, you know, if you want, or at least an outline in your head, and you do some grouping, and you try to organize your thoughts, and you have a main topic, supporting points, and then other supporting points that relate to the main topic, and then like a summary conclusion. And basically is the format for writing anything. And it just comes down to expressing an idea and being consistent with expressing the idea rather than going back and forth. So if the article is about a 2-year-old boy forced to live in jail, you want to just keep writing about that, and you don't want to write about
anything else.
Yeah, you don't want to write about boys to men in the middle of the article. And say, by the way, I like boys to men in the middle of the article. It doesn't fit. You know, you would eliminate that.
Thank you very much for speaking with us and telling us more about print journalism. And look forward to all your work in the future. Wish you all the best.
And for showing you around the UB Post. And I'd like to plug my last article, actually, that I wrote. Please read the article I wrote on the Nile River Project. I'm very proud of that article. It's a very interesting idea. And you might find it interesting reading.
So if you study journalism and writing, you don't necessarily have to go for a job in the media. You may want to try your hand at writing books and becoming a published author. And today we are lucky enough to have a published author with us today who has written books about Mongolia. So please welcome Jeff Fault.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
All right. My name is Jeffrey Fault. I'm an American, if you can't tell, originally from California. I came to Mongolia first in 2000 and fell in love with the place and fell in love with a woman. We married. We live here. I've lived here with her since 2004. And along that period, very shortly after we married, she told me a story that sounded fascinating. And that turned into a book. We can talk more about that as you wish. Yeah, I'm a lawyer by background, and I worked in human rights mostly in all the hot and dangerous places around the world. That's why Mongolia seems so restful and so pleasant in contrast to places like Cambodia, Liberia, and so on. So I'm delighted that I live here. It's a wonderful place. Although we do like to get away once in a while.
So Mongolia is obviously a big inspiration to you. Is there any other things that inspire you in your writing?
Well, both of us are very concerned with human rights and social justice. And that does show up in our writing. And both of us are very interested in the anthropology of various cultures, including Mongolia's, which is what prompted this book, which is a story of an American tourist who is visiting a Mongolian herder family for a week and experiencing life the way the herders experience it. And he has numerous questions about traditional Mongolian herder culture. And of course they have questions about his life. And what prompted us to write this story, this is called Nomadic Dialogues. There's still a few copies around in the bookstores, I think. This is a story that was prompted because many people who want to learn English in Mongolia are limited in the kind of resources they're able to access. For instance, you pick up a book on learning English and it may be about where you catch the underground to go to Piccadilly Circus and have tea and crumpets. It has nothing to do with herder life, for instance, and a different vocabulary. So we wanted to write a book and we did cassettes to go along with it so people could listen and play them, this one has 41 dialogues in Mongolian and in English. They're the same 41 dialogues in the two languages. And so they can follow along in the English, they can read first the Mongolian and see what we're talking about. And it's things like how you make Aral, how do you make Airag, what's Nadam all about? The kinds of things that people in the countryside might be asked by visiting tourists. So that's what we targeted the book toward, filling that gap. But it turned out that a lot of tourists visiting Mongolia like the book because it tells them things like that.
Yes.
And if they want to go horseback riding, they can say, oh, dialogue 31. And it's in Mongolian and English, and the Mongolian host can say, oh, you want to go horseback? Okay. So it's very useful for tourists in the countryside as well.
Yep. So teaching relevant English.
Relevant English, absolutely.
That's a thing we aim to do for the youth in Mongolia as well. And I noticed you have another book. Would you like to maybe tell us a bit about this one?
Nogan Nuden Lam, which I'm sure many of you have heard about. It's the Green-Eyed Lama in English. It's a story of the 1937-38 purge of Buddhism in Mongolia and its aftermath, from the standpoint of the people who were themselves involved. And in fact, the character, the Green-Eyed Lama, is my wife's great uncle.
Oh, wow, yeah.
People probably know that I co-wrote this with my wife. Her name is Oyungarel Sedemdamba, and I think many people know her. And so she told me the story in 2004, right when we married. And I said, oh, that's a wonderful story. And she said, well, let's write it. And we tried first writing it in Mongolian, but and we got a very good translator, but it was just, it's an awkward language to translate from one language to the other. So her language got better and better, and she eventually wrote a draft in English, and it was from that draft that we worked and reworked, and we're still working on it. This came out in 2008 or 7, but we're still working on the English draft, and we now have an agent in London who's very excited about the book and giving us additional suggestions. So the book, that if it comes out in English in Great Britain and in the United States, it will be somewhat different because along the way we've learned how to write, which was part of this entire experience.
Excellent. I'll try and give it a read if it ever comes out.
Thank you.
So you talked about you yourself are learning how to write as you go along.
Oh, yeah.
Do you have any advice for the people maybe watching at home, how to write or how to get into writing?
If you want to write fiction, firstly, do a lot of research. Research is really important. And for me, that's a challenge because I read Mongolian very slowly and don't know what half the words mean. Well, maybe more than half. But my wife did a lot of research in Mongolian. There is material in English, which I read to help prepare us for what we want to do. And then we went out into the countryside and we stayed with the descendants of the families who were involved in this and observed what everyday life is like. And they told us lots of stories about what grandma told them and so on. So you built up a resource base of information that you access when you write. Then you have to have a keen sense for how to tell a story.
Yep.
Neither one of us had written fiction before. We'd both written technical stuff. But my wife is a great storyteller. And she'd thought about this story for years, ever since her grandmother started telling her stories back when she was a child. And it molded in her head all that time. And she found that she could write it. Many people have strategies, different strategies, depending on the author, of how to write. And they make long lists of the people they expect to be in it, the characters, what their personalities are like. They refer back and forth. They draft out a scene. They draft out a chapter. They make a large draft of the whole story. They try to stick to that. My sister writes, and she does that. And she's very good at that. But this was much more organic, I would say. And we found something that Mark Twain, the American writer, once wrote, that when he started in the morning, he knew what his characters were going to do, but by afternoon, they'd taken over and were telling him what they were going to do. And Ayuna found that often. And at first, it bothered her, and then she said,